When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker, hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker, hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review. This is Chris Driscoll, and along with me is my co-host and good buddy and political collaborator, partner in crime, Rainer Shea. Hello, Rainer. How are you?
Hello. The election has played out kind of how I would have expected it to in the first 24 hours or so of the voting process. Unlike 4 years ago and seemingly most other elections in the last few generations, we haven't known the results on election night. And I think it's because of the pandemic. The pandemic is the cause, because it has caused all this confusion and the additional process of counting the mail-in ballots.
Yeah.
Last I know, Biden is just 6 electoral votes away from winning.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, he already has it in the bag. They're being extremely cautious here in Arizona. Even though, I mean, Arizona was allowed to count early, so they started the counting last week. But they still have a big chunk to go in counting. But it's pretty obvious where the counting is coming from. It's basically Maricopa County, which is Phoenix, Pima County, which is Tucson, Coconino County, which is Flagstaff. I mean, the 3 population centers are where all the rest of the votes are coming from. And they're all mail-in early votes that are still being counted. And they've been going like 70-30 to 70% to Trump, to Biden. So, I mean, to me, it's already obvious that they've won Arizona, which is astounding because it's only happened like one other time since 1948 that a Democrat presidential candidate wins Arizona. Nevada, same thing. They're holding back because they're still counting votes, mail-in votes, basically. And we know that the mail-in votes were heavily Biden because the idiot Trump told all his people not to mail in their ballots. Of course, a lot of people ignored him. So that 30%, those are the people who said, I'm going to mail in. I'm not going to wait and go get COVID-19 on election day. So, yeah, I mean, in my opinion, those 2 states will way put him over the edge. There's also Georgia, which is right now up in the air. I mean, for a good bit of the time since yesterday when the polls closed, Georgia was really looking like Trump. Trump had a substantial lead yesterday in Georgia. However, that lead has whittled down and whittled down and whittled down. I think Trump has, something like 90,000 above Biden right now. And it's the same story in Georgia as it is here in Arizona. Basically all of the uncounted votes are like Atlanta, uh, Augustus, Savannah. Name the big cities in Georgia, and that's where the bulk of the rest of the votes are from. So Biden even has a chance in Georgia. Um, all the networks now have called Wisconsin and Michigan for Biden. From what I can see from the map and what we know about the voting habits of people in this COVID year, Biden's already won the election. So our task tonight is to talk more about why that's a bad thing for America, just like it would be a bad thing if Trump remained president. Either way, it's a bad thing. So that's what we'll mostly be. We'll be doing a lot of discussion tonight along those lines. Some really surprising stuff, however. The Biden polls right up to the end were saying that he had like an average 7% lead. Well, Biden is not getting 7% above Trump, more like 2-3% above Trump in the popular vote. So it's enough to win the popular vote. I mean, Biden's ahead right now by a little more than 3 million. If you remember, Hillary Clinton won the election last time around by 2.7 million. So Biden is outperforming in a way, outperforming Hillary Clinton. However, you've also got to calculate in that there are millions more people in America today, and millions more people of voting age than there were in 2016. So it's pretty obvious that the absolute numbers of people turning out should be larger just from population increase. I think they've gotten a little bit of a bump also from the fact that a lot of people are extremely fearful on both sides. The Trump people are extremely fearful that Biden is going to bring in some socialist revolution or something, which is the most absurd thing when you really look at Biden's record. I mean, Biden has been a true blue Wall Streeter, loyal to Wall Street, loyal to the billionaire class during his whole 40-year plus record, his whole 40-year plus time in office and in politics. It's just an absurd notion, but that's what those people are afraid of. The Biden people, on the other hand, are afraid of Trump, smashing democracy as though there had ever been democracy in the United States, which is also an absurd idea, because the United States was created as a plutocracy, not as a democracy. And it's been a plutocracy ever since, run by the super rich, run by the billionaire class, run by Wall Street, run by the capitalist ruling class. So it's absurd. The notion that there has ever been democracy in the United States is an absurd notion. But the Democrats, the idiot liberals, they think that this is real democracy, what they see here, which is basically the billionaires running the country is democracy. So they're fearful that Trump's going to take that away. Trump's threatening democracy, that Trump's threatening to trample all over their rights, so forth and so on. So on either side, there's been a huge amount of fear, and I think that that's pumped up the vote a little bit. In these elections, you'll see figures like for the 2016 election, you'll have seen the figures. 54% of the voters electorate turned out, or 56% of the electorate turned out. Those are bogus figures. They're the official government figures that are based on two different measures. One of them is just based on eligible voters, that is, the whole population of people who could vote if they wanted to. That's called VEP, I think, voter voting election population, something like that. And the other one's called VAP, voting age population, which includes people who are not registered to vote, includes people like me who is not registered, includes felons and ex-felons who cannot vote, includes legal immigrants who are not citizens who cannot vote. So it includes that. So it, you know, the actual, what it says for the voter turnout comes out to be 54% instead of 56 or 57%. However, if we were to look at all the adults in America, which includes undocumented immigrants, as an example, who are not included at all in either of those government figures. And if you were to include institutionalized people, like people in mental wards and people in that kind of thing, if you were to, if you really included all of the people who are not included in those official government statistics, it comes out, by my calculations, the calculations are pretty easy, but it comes out to about 49, a little more than 49% of the people, of the adult population in America, the voting age of people being 18, anyone over 18, 49 and a couple of percentage, like 49.2%, something like that, is the number of people who actually voted in 2016. Now, given what I've seen so far of the extra people voting this time around, it's looking like maybe 10 million more people voted this time around than last time, so, or something a little bit less than 10 million. I'd say that the actual voter turnout, the real voter turnout's probably about 51% this time. We'll have to wait and see, because for all these figures and statistics to come in, it takes at least until the end of the month, end of November, to even begin to process this stuff. So we won't really know until then. But that, you know, like a 1.7% more people voting, the mass media is saying this is a record. This never happened before. You know, they're blowing it up into what it's not, and what it's not is anything that anyone who really believed in democracy would be proud of. There's no other developed country in the world that has a pathetic turnout like the USA. USA is number one in bad turnout and low turnout. It's absurd from my point of view. Anyway, the polls were saying that Biden would get a much higher vote than he did, even though he's winning the popular vote. He's winning by a much smaller margin. The polls were saying there was going to be a blue wave in Congress, that the Democrats would take the Senate and hold the House. That has not happened. In fact, the Democrats have actually lost seats in Congress and in the House of Representatives, and they've only gained one new seat in the Senate, and they needed to get 3-4. Biden's underperformance from the polls, no blue wave. The Democrats really did poorly. It's really bad news for them. The Republicans obviously are doing poorly because they're going to lose the presidency. So it's bad news for them. It's just bad news all the way around for capitalist parties. So we should be quite happy.
I see. I see. Now, which subject are we on?
We're on the election 2020.
Okay, like
First
in
section.
general.
Huh?
Okay, in general.
And the first topic. You launched into it before I had a chance to announce it, but we're in
I see.
we're in the first topic, which I thought that's fine because that's the topic of the day, obviously.
Yeah. Man, it seems like you're taking it for granted that Trump won't actually be able to stage the coup that's part of this fear factor on the Democratic side that you described. And if so, I would agree that Trump won't ultimately be able to stay in office after January 20th, because the U.S. Constitution, and it has more control. It has the defining authority over the military, more than Trump has, and the U.S. ruling class won't allow their Potemkin democracy to be destabilized so much.
Right. Exactly.
So there's going to be a bunch of BS litigation and disingenuous tweets, and probably will be violence, plenty of violence. And this is something that we'll also need to worry about going into the Biden years and beyond, as I plan on describing on the show later.
Yeah, I expected that also. I expected the violence to come earlier. There's really been almost zero, statistically speaking, zero violence so far. I would expect that. I still expect that. But the litigation's already started. Trump is already suing in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, which is really the biggest indication of all that Trump has lost the election. Because I mean, those that I just named. Those two states are states that are must-win states. He's also launched litigation already in Arizona, which is kind of absurd when you think about it. I mean, the Biden victory in Arizona is pretty clear. I say it's astounding just from historic point of view, but living here and knowing the demographic changes that the state has been going through, even in the last 4 years, it's not surprising to me that Trump lost Arizona. Nevada, same thing, because Nevada's going through exactly the same stuff Arizona's going through. Big changes in the suburbs, for example. The suburbs are much more people of color today. They're much more oppressed nationalities today. They're much more working class than they were in past. And actually, if you're familiar with a city like Phoenix, Phoenix isn't really a city. The whole fucking thing is a suburb. The whole city is a suburb, and then they have suburbs outside of the suburbs. There is no city in Phoenix. The city, the actual, what anyone might call a city, it's 7 or 8 blocks. That's it. I mean, I've seen first Midland-sized cities that had larger inner cities than Phoenix has. Phoenix is all suburb. So
yeah, suburbs are one of the symptoms of capitalism.
Yeah, actually,
communist architecture is superior in that even though it doesn't look superficially pleasing like a suburb does, and don't get me wrong, suburbs are pretty dang ugly.
Yeah.
Communist housing destroys homelessness.
Right. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to the next topic, if we can move on to that. That is the liberal illusion that Biden would stop fascism's rise. And while you talk, I'm going to step away for a minute because I've already read the article, so I know what you're going to say. Take it away, Biden. Take it away, Rainer.
Yeah. In this article, I focus on the really, what should be really obvious to anybody who votes for Biden, which is that the whole process that capitalism has been moving towards will continue to be in development, and I think that it will continue to accelerate under Biden. I mean, the most substantial differences between Biden and Trump when it comes to how much they'll accelerate the advancement towards fascism and necropolitics is Biden has said that he'll support a $15 minimum wage, and Biden will potentially protect social programs more than Trump in certain regards, and maybe not follow along the same hardline GOP Reaganomics model that Trump has followed in, and also Biden won't say things like stand back and stand by to the Proud Boys, but Biden is going to I think that Biden is going to expand the necropolitical aspects of U.S. governance in other regards, and he's going to do this in ways that Trump has not been so much capable of doing. Because one of the big reasons why the liberal elites who are backing Biden really want Trump out is that Trump has hindered the functionings of U.S. imperialism. Trump has through his ultranationalistic tendencies and his protectionism and his relative hostility towards European powers, Trump has made it harder for Washington to cooperate with the other imperialist powers in carrying out regime change operations and wars. And this is why the editor of the Miami Herald, Andres Oppenheimer, has endorsed Biden, because he thinks that under Biden there will be a better chance for Washington to successfully overthrow the Chavista government. And I guess we'll have to see how right Andres is. Hopefully he's just engaging in wishful thinking, but I guess it's true that under a return to the Obama model of internationalist imperialism, under a return to the Obama model, there will be greater ability for the U.S. NATO empire to coordinate towards waging war against countries like Venezuela and Russia and China and Iran and Syria. This really reflects what the chief of NATO said in June. He said that countries, by which he means the core imperialist countries, must resist the temptation for national solutions in countering their rivals to these imperialist countries. So it's a consensus among the imperialist technocrats, at least the ones who really know what they're doing, that the Obama model is a superior, more efficient, more effective approach towards imperialism as compared to Trumpism, which is pretty reckless and has diminished Washington's power. And so in these next 4 years, we're going to see greater escalations against Venezuela. We're also going to see more Obama-style coups in Latin America. Who knows what kind of damage Biden could do around the world? I mean, given the now relatively diminished influence of U.S. imperialism, because let's not forget, Biden is one of the people who helped carry out the 2014 neo-Nazi coup in Ukraine with the purpose of creating a military buffer against Russia. So this is the one of the biggest dangers of a Biden presidency, that he's going to accelerate the global exporting of U.S. necropolitics towards countries like Ukraine and Venezuela, and we'll see how they'll handle the Bolivia thing, because the Bolivian right wingers are freaking out right now. In a few days, Socialist is going to be inaugurated in Bolivia, and we're going to have to see what the Bay of Pigs moment in Bolivia will look like.
Yes, frightening, isn't it? Yeah, Biden is going to bring a real fascist wave. That's what I look for out of Biden. Not a blue wave, but a fascist wave. You're absolutely correct on that. He wasn't just instrumental in, involved in the Ukraine, the bloody, illegal coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014. He was Obama's appointed point man. That's what Obama called him, the point man. The guy who was supposed to round up all the American forces involved in orchestrating that bloody Nazi fascist coalition coup government. And I call it Nazi fascist because it was a coalition of political parties, some of which are outright Nazi parties. Most of which, and the larger bulk of them, were outright fascist parties, more in like the Mussolini vein of fascism than in the Hitler vein of fascism. But either way, they've been extremely bad for anyone who is ethnically Russian, who lives in Ukraine, which is about 1/3 of Ukrainians, 1/3 of the population. And that's not even including Crimea. I mean, Crimea was even much more ethnic Russian before they struck out to take their independence and then rejoin, we should say, Russia, because the Crimea was a part of Russia up until 1954, when Khrushchev, who was a Ukrainian, Khrushchev gave it away to Ukraine. Lo and behold, I mean, talk about serving your own nationality at the expense of the whole rest of the Soviet Union. That's exactly what Khrushchev did. And Russia, which is the whole eastern part of Ukraine, was part of Russia until the early 1920s, like 1922, I believe it is, when Lenin gave that part of Russia away to Ukraine as a kind of a sop to the Ukrainian Bolsheviks, because the Ukrainian Bolsheviks were saying that as it was, they didn't have enough of a industrial base, and that was the closest place there was an industrial base, and they were basically holding out and joining the Soviet Union until Lenin, agreed to give away Belarusia, And so Russia, with Little Russia, technically translated as Little Russia. Little Russia it has since 1922 been part of Ukraine. So, it's absurd for the Ukrainian coup government, the fascist government of Ukraine, to be waging war against these people for declaring their independence. Not all of them have declared their independence. Only 2 provinces have declared their independence, and then, of course, Crimea, which is not just independent anymore. It is a part of Russia now, because it was annexed by Russia, and that's what the people overwhelmingly voted for.
Yeah.
Anyway, this Biden character, people in Latin America are really going to have to watch out. He's going to bring a fascist wave throughout the world, not just here at home, but he's also going to bring a fascist wave here at home. So this really is a liberal illusion that Biden would stop fascism.
Yeah, what I was going to say was that in Ukraine, this regime has not just targeted ethnic Russians, but Jews and LGBT people and political prisoners. There have been lots of human rights abuses and
Assassinations.
seemingly from the start there was moves towards what they called filtration camps. So as soon as Washington got their hands into it, and they tried to portray it as a democratic revolution, while also at the same time concealing their role in it, because they didn't want to look like their hands were dirty. But that Washington was complicit in these steps towards genocide in Ukraine, and now Ukraine has become an example of a failed state where neo-Nazi militias are able to consequently run with more impunity. Neo-fascists these fascists are taking advantage of Ukraine's descent into a failed state partly as a result of this war and of this fascistic governance. So I wonder what the next regime Washington installs will be. I don't know if it'll be Bolivia, because the MAS movement is so incredibly strong there. They were able to overcome the current regime.
Yeah, well, the main thing to understand is that for neoliberalism to continue, and it's pretty obvious now that the capitalist class as a whole intends to continue with neoliberalism. At the same time, larger and larger groups of people throughout the world are rejecting neoliberalism, and it's putting the capitalists in a position, even here in the United States, where it's very unpopular. It's putting them in a position where they will have to bring in much more repression in order to be able to sustain this this crushing policy, this policy that's basically a policy of crushing the working class in the United States and crushing the working class all over the world. That's what they will have to do. The next topic, the Biden crime family in Ukraine and China. Lo and behold, good segue there, Rainer. There was another big brouhaha, of course, because of a couple of weeks back, the New York Post published an article exposing the Biden crime families, including Joe Biden, pedophile Joe, as I call him, exposing their criminal dealings, their corruption, misuse of the power of the vice presidency, just a lot of corruption, bribery, and so forth in both Ukraine and in China. Now, the right wing, with the situation in China, the right wing has been taking this opportunity to claim that Joe Biden has a working business relationship with the Communist Party of China, which is an enormous stretch. It's a lie. What's really going on there is in China, which people are probably not as familiar with as Ukraine. We've talked about Ukraine over and over again on this show. But in China, this is actually, I think, really the first time we've talked about this. But Joe Biden's brother and his son Hunter, were trying to work up a deal in 2011, 2012, back when Biden was still vice president of the United States. They were trying to trade on Joe Biden's name and his power to work out a deal with an American, with a Ukrainian company called CEFC China Energy. CEFC China Energy is a private Chinese conglomerate. It is not owned in any way by the government. It's not a state company. It's a private enterprise company. It's listed on the Fortune 500. It's one of the 10 largest private companies in China. At least it was in 2014. And it was one of the 2 largest energy corporations in China. Now, since that time, Biden, of course, Hunter and Biden's brother passed along lots of big bribes to the CEO of CEFC China Energy. The CEO was named Yi Jianming, and he ran the CEFC, and he was basically a criminal, and as a result, he is in jail right now in China. The Chinese government has arrested him, put him in jail, indicted him. He will be going to trial for bribery. The actual charge that they got him under, although they could have gotten him for a lot more. They could have gotten him for taking bribes from the Bidens, for one thing. But they got him for bribing a local Communist Party official in where was it? I think it's in trying to find this here, in Shanghai, I guess. In Shanghai, one of the officials of the local Chinese Communist Party was caught taking bribes from this Yi Jianming, and that's the reason that he is under indictment. So, I mean, obviously, you know, the Chinese Communist Party would not do that if they were trying to, you know, make a deal with the Bidens. It's just a ridiculous claim. We do know that there is corruption in China. I mean, that should be obvious to all, because as of 2011, President Xi launched a massive anti-corruption campaign all over China, and it was aimed heavily at local CP officials who were on the take, taking bribes in just this kind of manner. So we know that the Chinese Communist Party's official line and the fervent wish of the Chinese president is to crush this this corruption. Now, meanwhile, the entire company of CEFC no longer exists. The company that the Biden boys were going to have a deal with is no longer in existence. So that kind of went away as an opportunity for them. In the Post article, the New York Post, there was a line there where from emails, they found emails on a laptop of Hunter Biden, which Hunter Biden apparently originally took in to have the data recovered because the hard drive crashed. But then after the company recovered the data, they could not get in touch with Hunter Biden again. He orphaned his PC. So the people in the in this little computer store, they just turned it over to the FBI. Then the FBI sat on it for like a year and did nothing about it because, as we all know, the FBI is heavily partisan towards the Obama-Biden former regime. Even now, even a lot of them are now, and that's been coming out for a couple of years now. So it's not a surprise that the FBI just sat on all this evidence of crimes by Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and Joe Biden's brother, including, according to one of these emails, I think between Hunter Biden and somebody else, they were going to be making certain several $1 million off this CEFC deal. And they were going to be holding 10% for the big guy. That was their euphemism. Now, anybody who knows anything about the criminal underworld knows that that means Joe Biden, pedophile Joe. So, I mean, it's all pretty clear. And yet, when people tried to put this on Twitter would not allow it on there, which caused a huge brouhaha. None of the billionaire-owned capitalist media published this or made mention of it or anything like that. All the TV networks, except maybe Fox, refused to publish it or talk about it. I think Fox may have had a few mentions of it, but they didn't really talk about it very much either because, I mean, Rupert Murdoch is not an American nationalist. He's a fucking international globalist, Just because he's a right-wing so-called conservative, doesn't mean that he's a nationalist. He's not. So even Fox was like kind of hesitant on that. So there you have it. Another example of the most of the mass media, the espionage and police agencies of the federal government and the Democrat Party all colluding to keep this truth about Biden and his son and his brother from you. Same kind of stuff went on in Ukraine. Of course, we talked about that with the Burisma, the corrupt company, with Joe Biden boasting in a video that he got the chief prosecutor of Ukraine fired, who was at that time investigating Burisma's crimes. And then, lo and behold, after that, Hunter Biden gets a job with Burisma, sitting on his ass doing nothing because he didn't know how to do anything. He didn't know a first fucking thing about the energy industry. And there you have it. It's more incredible bullshit. So what do you think?
Yeah, so this what you just described seems to put to rest the idea that Biden will act as some kind of friendly pal for China. Biden's made it clear that he'll continue to escalate the U.S. Cold War efforts against China, and his family's attempts to get cozy with certain officials within the Chinese government, they've been neutralized evidently by the zero tolerance policy that the party has for corruption. So I wonder if this will morph into Russiagate 2.0, except it's Chinagate and it's directed at Biden. And it comes from the Republicans, who, as you described, will have a lot of power in Congress and the Senate. So I bet the next 4 years will be an version of Russiagate.
Probably. Very, very likely, anyway. Yeah, that's very probable. Okay, moving right along. We're already well into the hour. We've got about 12 minutes left in the first hour, and we're only on topic 3. Let's move to topic 4. The beginning of the end for imperialism's grip over Latin America. Take it away, Rainer Shea.
When this Bolivian election happened last month, I learned about a song written by a Chilean songwriter who he wrote it in 1973, and it's called "The People United Will Never Be Defeated." And I don't remember the exact lyrics, but it's incredibly powerful, and it continues to speak to this struggle that the people throughout the region are engaging in against the forces of imperialism. I mean, at the root of the despotism and necropolitics and corruption and racism and state violence and injustice that afflicts the vast majority of Latin America is U.S. imperialism. I believe that if it were not for the dozens of CIA operations that the U.S. has carried out in Latin America in this last century, it seems like most of the region would have developed towards socialism by now. So Latin America is stuck in this historically backwards state. They're deprived of the system that and so many of their ancestors tried to install, but they were massacred by Operation Condor, which was a campaign of political repression led by Washington and carried out by Washington's puppet dictatorships in Chile, Brazil, Bolivia, and I'm pretty sure a few others. So now the dictatorship in Chile has it's pretty much been finally been really overthrown because throughout this whole time the Pinochet era constitution has still been in place in Chile, and last month Chileans after a year of intense protest and trying to get the government to concede, they were able to put a vote to this constitution, and they voted to replace it. Of course, the process towards making Chilean society more equal is going to be long and hard, because apparently the new constitution won't be voted on until 2022, at which point the forces of neoliberalism will probably distort the gains that the social movements will try to make through this constitution. So it'll have to be a compromise, and it'll also have to be a compromise in Bolivia and Venezuela, because none of the countries in Latin America besides Cuba have so far had proletarian revolution, as far as I know, and the capitalist state remains in place in all these places in the region except Cuba. So the movements towards socialism and human rights and indigenous liberation and environmental justice, they'll all have to deal with these contradictions within the societies they live in. And it's going to be an arduous process, but the long arc of history, I'm thinking of a MLK quote, the arc of history bends towards justice, and in this case it means the U.S. empire is slowly in decline. This is the arc that history is taking, where Washington's grip wanes as the multipolar world order rises, and Washington's resources and strength are getting sapped up both by external rivals and by internal instability, like through its economic collapse and all these other destabilizing factors. So I wonder what it'll look like 20 years from now. I wonder if Latin America will have more socialist revolutions by 2040. I wonder what the next country in the region will be to have this event. Will it be Colombia, Chile? Colombia is a real possibility, because Colombia has been experiencing big protests in response to its police brutality, and the class contradictions there are to the greatest extent throughout the region. Ecuador is another example of how austerity and state violence have been killing people, especially throughout the pandemic.
Yeah. I anticipate seeing a wave of socialist revolutions in Latin America, especially in South America. You look at the protest movement in the last year, it has been blowing up. Chile comes to mind in particular, because Chile, prior to the COVID-19 plague, the working class of Chile had been basically at one point had run the whole government out of Santiago de Chile, the capital city, and that's extraordinary in and of itself. Now, they lack a leadership. They're in a kind of a similar situation to America for exactly the same reason. We lack leadership because our leadership was destroyed in the late 40s and early 50s by the Democrat and Republican parties in an era that was called McCarthyism after Joe McCarthy, Senator Joe McCarthy, but really, it should have been named as much after several Democrat senators, like Senator John F. Kennedy, for example. Kennedy was well, because Kennedy's father, Joe Kennedy, was a big backer of Joe McCarthy, um, JFK had a real in with Joe McCarthy, and they worked hand in hand in all of their brutal McCarthyist repression during that period. And of course, he's not the only one. I mean, he was a young guy just in the Senate, so he was just following the lead of this Republican senator who his father had an extremely close relationship with. But Chile, of course, went through the 1973 bloody, illegal right-wing coup d'etat, fascist coup d'etat, sponsored, funded, directed by the American empire, by the and obviously the American state. And they did heavy repression. I had some friends. Matter of fact, for a while in the late late 80s and early 90s, I lived with a Chilean Colombian family. The mother was Chilean and the father was Colombian. And the father was a Marxist professor of Marxist economics at a university in Chile. Even though he's Colombian, he had, they speak the same language, of course. So they had a lot of real interesting stories to tell, and they had been totally run out of Chile during that time. They came to the United States basically as refugees from what the United States had done. So yeah, Chile, because of that, the two major parties, the Socialist Party, which was a real actually to the left of the Communist Party in Chile, and of course Salvador Allende was the head of the Chilean Socialist Party, and the Socialist Party, which was extremely anti-imperialist and not your typical social democrat party, very revolutionary, and the Communist Party, which they were in a coalition with during the 3 years that Allende was president, 1970 to 73. They were basically totally wiped out or driven out of Chile. Some of them have obviously been returned since then, but they don't have anywhere near the strength they had. I mean, obviously in 1970, they had the strength to win an election, and become president and the ruling party of Chile. But they were pretty much wiped out. I mean, tens of thousands of them were outright murdered by the fascists, put in jail for long-term periods, tortured in the most horrendous possible way, or left and came to the United States. There was the Letelier case in 1976 where Letelier had been the Allende government's ambassador to the United States, and he had just stayed in Washington, D.C. after the coup happened, which pretty smart on his part because he knew he would be murdered if he went back to Chile. And he was murdered anyway. He and his young American assistant murdered in a car bomb. And it was very obvious that this was done by agents of the Chilean government, of the Chilean fascist coup government. So there was a lot of repression during that time, and they haven't recovered yet. And I think that's the only thing stopping that's holding back there being a socialist revolution there right now, because they haven't had the opportunity to rebuild that kind of leadership they once had. But other countries are not in the same situation, and they have these huge upsurges. Yeah, I anticipate that. So we'll see. Let's see, we're already past the first hour, so might be a good idea for us to move on. Where were we? We're in beginning of the end for imperialism's grip over Latin America. Now we move on to a related story. Joe Biden's pro-fascist, pro-imperialist Latin America policies. This becomes more crucial now because it's pretty obvious at this point that Biden is going to be the next president, barring any unfortunate accidents, like, a Trump mob murdering him or something like that. I mean, obviously, as soon as he becomes the president-elect, he'll have Secret Service protection even before he becomes president. We'll see what happens there. But Biden, of all places, the New York Times, the liberal New York Times, published an article on the 27th, and I'm reading about this on an article from Mint Press on the 28th by Alan McLeod. And the New York Times had published an article the day prior to that, focused on Joe Biden's Latin America plans and policies. Deep in the article, this article says, I'm going to read you just a little bit of it. Deep in the article is perhaps the most eye-opening sentence. Mr. Biden, quote from the New York Times, Mr. Biden's advisors say they would seek to revive the anti-corruption campaign that set off political earthquakes across the Americas starting in 2014, but largely stalled in recent years. And then the author of the Mint Press, author McLeod, goes on to say, what the authors are referring to is a continent-wide campaign to unseat progressive leaders that ended in the jailing of Brazilian President Lula da Silva, former president, and the impeachment of his successor, Dilma Rousseff, also from the Workers' Party. Both of them are from the Workers' Party of Brazil. This was repeated in various areas. I mean, across the South America in particular, and Central America, using the CIA and other spook agencies, espionage agencies. They attempted to overthrow Hugo Chavez and the former president of Cuba, Raul Castro, Fidel Castro's brother. He also says, and so while the Times report presents Bolsonaro as an adversary of Biden, his rise was directly facilitated by the Obama administration's policies in Latin America. This article goes on and on talking about Biden's policies towards Latin America, and it really looks like what we're going to see is a big increase in the in the American government's meddling, sabotage, asymmetrical hybrid warfare against any left-wing government in Latin America. That would be particularly Nicaragua and Venezuela. So we can expect that the pressure on those countries, and maybe even proxy invasions of those countries, will be coming about.
Yeah, I don't know what a proxy invasion could realistically look like, because recently Washington has been, I mean, what it would realistically look like in Latin America, because I've been observing how Washington has been building towards a proxy invasion against Venezuela through Colombia, Brazil, and might be some Central American states too. But the election of Luis Arce in Bolivia has made this more untenable, because they need Bolivia as one of the support systems in the region who won't push back against Brazil if it aggresses against Venezuela. And of course, Venezuela has such strong forces. It would be very costly for the empire to invade, even if it were to get Brazil to do this. And of course, such an event would multiply the COVID-19 crisis that's afflicting these neoliberal Latin American countries. So the costs would be extremely high if they were to try to pull this off in Venezuela. But they can continue to try to work towards coups within some countries, like Nicaragua. Throughout this year, Washington, particularly U.S. aid, has formulated a plan to transition towards a neoliberal regime in Nicaragua through whatever means necessary, including democratic means, though this is pretty much a given. I think that the Latin American country that's most likely to experience a successful coup is Mexico, since it seems like AMLO's government is relatively vulnerable towards subversion. I mean, it's not like he has any kind of militant movement behind him like Maduro has, and he's a social democrat who's totally working within the system. So potentially we'll see a coup in Mexico.
Huh. I hadn't thought of that. I'd have to look into that. I mean, from what I know, just on the surface, Mexico is pretty well defended against American plots and coups, and they're very experienced with it. They know that it's coming. I can't believe that AMLO is that stupid, but we'll see. I'll have to look into that more, because it's been kind of hard, I've noticed, since AMLO became president, to follow Mexican news at the federal level, federal news of the United States of Mexico, as it's officially called. So yeah, that's something I'll have to look into now that you've brought it up. Is there anything in particular that brings that up to you, or just
well,
feeling, or what?
Well, in this last month, in response to AMLO's recent moves towards trying to protect Mexico's interests, I think in terms of oil, like prioritize Mexico's oil interests over Washington, the interests of the Washington corporatocracy. A bunch of business leaders have sent a letter to Trump asking him to do something to stop this. So this is yet another indication that the U.S. capitalist ruling class is not happy with AMLO in charge.
Oh yeah. I reported on that whenever it came out. I think it was like a couple of months ago. I mean, on this show I reported on it, but I don't take that very seriously, because, as I said, Mexican the Mexican people in general are extremely anti-imperialist. Number one, that's the reason someone like AMLO, an anti-imperialist social democrat, could be elected. And I believe that AMLO himself, we should say his name, President Lopez Obrador. He's affectionately known by the nickname AMLO, which I think is an acronym. Anyway, I think he knows quite a lot about imperialist plots and how to foil them. I mean, Mexico is a developed country. It's not a third world country in any way, except that it has a brutal ruling class, just like the United States does. So there are a lot of poor people in Mexico who live under third world conditions, just like there are in the United States these days with the crumbling infrastructure and so forth. But as a government, as a military force, as a police force, Mexico is quite strong. It's a highly developed, highly industrialized country, and I don't see that happening there. But as I say, I haven't paid a lot of attention to Mexico. Maybe we should start paying more attention to it. If you're just talking about that one thing that I reported a couple months ago about the coup, the really poor, tepid coup attempts by some idiot ruling class figures in Mexico, that's exactly what I would expect, but it wasn't really very serious. The Mexican government didn't really seem to bat an eye over it. They just, anyway, well, we'll have to look more into that, and we will. Interesting point though, Rainer. Let's see. Next on the list, anti-police state protests erupt in Washington, D.C. This is last week. And Philadelphia after cops murder black youths in those two cities. See if I can, Jesus, it's been so long now. It's been days since I actually watched this story on RT. But if I can remember, let me see. In Philadelphia, it was a case of a mentally ill young black man whose mother called the police because the kid was ranting and raving and waving a knife around. And so the police came, and the boy at the same time ran out of the house, and the police thought, oh, this kid's running towards me with a knife. So they said, drop the knife, and then they started firing. And murdered the young kid without even giving him, I mean, a taser would have done the trick, or, one of those goop guns that any large police force like the Philadelphia police force should have had. But instead, they unloaded their clips, 5 or 6 cops unloading their clips on this kid. So there were massive demonstrations afterwards in Philadelphia. Much of which broke out into violence. I think there were something like 14 protesters injured. A couple of cops were injured. Then in Washington, D.C., in another case, I think this was a case of in D.C., the young black man, I think he was 20, 21. He was illegally riding a moped without a helmet. And in DC, the law says you got to have a helmet. So the police tried to stop the kid. The kid wasn't going to be stopped. He just puttered along, running away from the cops, which is kind of a Keystone Cop movie kind of thing, if you think about it. I mean, it's an unfortunate thing, but it's got a comedic aspect too. The kid kept running, and finally the family claims that the police deliberately rammed the back of the moped and ran the moped right into a car, and the kid lost his life, flying off the moped into a car. The police claim that the kid just lost control and ran into a car. Now, obviously there's got to be a lot more investigation in that, but there were big demonstrations that erupted in D.C., some of which turned into looting, although no violence that I was able to see. RT did a fantastic job of covering that. RT's national headquarters is based in Washington, D.C., right on Capitol Hill. So they've got plenty of reporters that were out covering this and did a stupendous job, but big eruptions there. So that's just the latest. What do you think?
It's the same old story every time. I remember in August you described something along the lines of an autistic black kid who was dancing while he was walking, and
exactly
the people who lacked the proper political education, they defaulted to calling the cops, and you know what happened next.
Yep.
Same thing happens every damn time.
Yeah.
That somebody calls the cops on like when a difficult situation comes up, or even when a situation comes up that a white person or whoever is the guilty party doesn't really understand, they call the cops by default.
Right.
So I guess this goes to show that if you're ever in a situation where, like especially if somebody with a mental disability, or if they're from a marginalized group, or if they have a neurological condition, then you shouldn't get the police involved. Or
exactly.
It seems like it's more likely than not that it'll escalate to murder.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, moving right along to topic number 7. Far-right propaganda is bringing America to the brink. Another Rainer Shea special. Take it away, Rainer.
Yeah. In these last few weeks, I've been researching QAnon in particular as it relates to these political strains that are threatening to unleash post-election violence. And I've studied what they believe. And across these strains, there seems to be some commonalities. I'm talking not just about QAnon, but about Falun Gong, which is the religious group. It's more like a cult that's behind all this anti-China propaganda that's been spread around in the U.S. throughout this last year or so. And I'm also talking about the Christian fanatics who are behind Trump. They've been a powerful force for decades, and they're obviously a big part of this radical right-wing strain that's threatening to unleash this unrest. I'm also talking about perhaps the most sinister among these strains, which are the neo-Nazis. All these strains, they have the same basic end goal of a violent moment of catharsis that destroys the old system and eliminates the undesirables and vindicates those within their those who follow their ideologies. I mean, QAnon is working towards, or they believe they're working towards. They're just believers. They believe that something called the storm is going to happen. The storm is going to be this. They say it's going to be this event where all the elite pedophiles are arrested, and where Trump basically carries out a violent coup against the rival forces within the U.S. government, and QAnon has gone on these long, alarming rants about how a state of temporary military control will be enacted, and the retribution against organizations or people who wish to do us harm will be swift, and an emergency broadcast system will be issued to try to overcome the fake news narratives. Basically telling all the members of this cult called QAnon to stand back and stand by for when violence will be unleashed, and when the members of this cabal that Trump is supposedly working against will be simultaneously arrested. So it's a doomsday cult, a lot like how the evangelical Christianity is like a doomsday cult. For decades, they've rationalized supporting Israel and voting for Republicans because they believe that this will bring about the biblical end times prophecy. They think that Jesus Christ will lift them up because they vote for Trump or support Trump's trying to move the capital of Israel to Jerusalem. Ironically, because they expect an apocalyptic battle to happen within Israel, which is it's paradoxical, and it's a lot like what Falun Gong followers expect. They also have apocalyptic expectations where God will purge the world of sinners, especially communists and the Communist Party of China. And apparently Trump is going to facilitate this. The Falun Gong believes Trump was sent by heaven to destroy the Communist Party. And like the conclusion I make in my article is all these strains, they're looking for the same thing that the neo-Nazis want. Their beliefs ultimately align with the neo-Nazis, and that they want a campaign of violence against against communists, against disfavored ethnic groups, against what the Nazis call the degenerates, and the more radical strains of these reactionary groups. They've embraced accelerationism. They want to accelerate society's tendency towards collapse because they believe that this will further their goals. And history backs them up. In Ukraine, we've been seeing how the country has descended into a failed state, and these Ukrainian nationalist groups, backed by Washington, have been exploiting it and terrorizing people. So these neo-Nazis are going to continue to try to take advantage of the pandemic and the economic instability and the general sense of anxiety within our society. Because this is what incentivizes people, these tens of millions of people, to become QAnon followers. They're anxious about the state of society and about the future. They're anxious about a myriad of issues, a lot of them actually legitimate, like the surveillance state in America and the reality of political corruption in America. You described how even the FBI continues to act in a partisan way, and this lets the Trump camp portray themselves as the victims. And when Trump supporters feel like victims who are fighting against an all-consuming enemy, it's easy to persuade them, apparently, to think that they have access to top secret information that's being disseminated through 4chan by this mysterious Q character who's telling them that Trump is just about to turn the corner and arrest all the pedophiles. So the pathologies that afflict our society, that afflict a society which is founded upon imperialism, colonialism, and capitalist violence and racism. This is the product. This is the derangement that the population is experiencing. They're being led towards a really violent and dangerous set of beliefs.
Yeah, this is astounding, isn't it? Yeah, these people want a race war. They want a class war, even even though some of these people are in of our class. Not very many, but some. Um, the overwhelming majority of our class is is not on that side. Yeah, and of course, this current election fits right into their paranoia, fuels their paranoia. Trump has fueled their paranoia. And, that's why you and I both said at the top of the show, we anticipate violence in the aftermath of this extraordinary election. This election that, in my opinion, it's the election is reminiscent of 1860 more than any other, because it is an election that was totally about the clash between two factions, two wings of the capitalist ruling class. And it just goes to show how, because the capitalist ruling class controls all the hegemony of the mind, the hegemony of culture, they control the mass media, they control the minds of a lot of weak-minded human beings, some of whom are even working class human beings, although most of them are middle class. Trump's, I mean, the statistics were clear in 2016 that 70% of Trump's voters came from the middle class, not from the working class. The working class is overwhelmingly anti-Trump, and apparently a whole lot of us are anti-Biden too, because a whole lot of us did not vote. The largest portion of the non-voters in America comes from the working class. All the statistical analyses over the last 30, 40 years have proved that beyond any doubt, and it's just as true today. Yeah, this QAnon phenomenon is it boggles the mind, really, when you think about it, and you can really see how, yes, in a way, this is bringing America to the brink. That's what they want, obviously. Trump, for his own nefarious purposes, is feeding right into this. Well, there was a reporter in one of Trump's that time when they called off the second debate because Joe Biden didn't want to catch COVID-19 from the infected Donald Trump, and said that he would only do it if he could, like sit in a glass booth to be totally protected from COVID-19. Instead, both of the bourgeois candidates did town halls, and in the town hall that Trump did, it was quite extraordinary, because the reporter who was the interviewer in the town hall for Trump, she asked some really tough questions, including questions about QAnon, which Trump just totally refused to answer. All he would say is, well, they don't like pedophiles. I don't like pedophiles. That's a good thing. But then he goes on to say, well, I don't know anything about this QAnon. I know nothing about it. You didn't get to see that, huh? It was
Wow.
it was pretty extraordinary.
Lying.
Yeah, I mean, but this reporter, I've never heard of her before, but she's a Fox reporter, you know, because it was being hosted by Fox, by Rupert Murdoch, in other words. She was really tenacious, much more tenacious than these milksop liberal idiots that they got to be the moderators for the other debates, you know, and the moderator, the interviewer for the Biden town hall on that same night. They were all just softball questions all the way. But this one reporter, she was really tenacious. She was trying to nail Trump to the wall in Trump's own town hall meeting, which was really entertaining. So anyway, QAnon, yeah, something we need to keep an eye on. I need to learn a lot more about it, although I try to avoid that kind of thing because, I mean, they're so obviously wackos that, you know, it's astounding to me that anyone can believe this shit. Anyway, is that it?
Well, I could also say that it's both astounding and not surprising that QAnon has become such a phenomenon. Because in 2018, WikiLeaks observed that it's pretty clear that QAnon is a Pied Piper operation. That's what they called it, a Pied Piper operation by U.S. intelligence, where where some state actors have been working to divert the attention of a lot of Trump's supporters towards something that will, well, I'm trying to look at the function of it. How has this particularly helped the public opinion hegemony that the empire depends on? Well, it's led all these Q people to view Assange as a psyop, as a double agent. This was one of the lines that was being pushed, that WikiLeaks is a psyop, that you should not support WikiLeaks. So it's clear how QAnon has been weaponized towards this end. It's also clear how QAnon has been weaponized towards getting all these people to totally give up any semblance of critical thought that they could have potentially developed at some point. It's in QAnon world, up is down, and the lies are truth, and it doesn't matter whether lies are truth. It literally doesn't matter, because one of the lines from QAnon that Q has been pushing is disinformation is necessary to carry out the messaging goals that we're trying to fulfill. So if you get some piece of information that turns out to be false, or if Q makes a prediction that turns out to be false, it's all to be expected, and this shouldn't dissuade you. So this is how the cult mentality has been instilled. This is how all these people who might have otherwise looked at Trump's hawkish Iran policies and bombings of Syria and imperialist operations, drone wars, and they've not thought critically about it in the slightest. They've just kept cheering and seen Trump as this five-dimensional chess player who's working towards the salvation of the land of the free.
That is really hilarious. Sad, but hilarious. Yeah, I don't know what to say more about it. Anyway, any final thoughts for the night?
No.
That's our last topic. I think we breezed right through that. It's only an hour and 35 minutes into the show. That's good. So that's it for us tonight. we'll be seeing you hopefully a little earlier in the week next week. This week we had some technical problems early on. Plus, it was kind of, I think, good that we ended up waiting and taping this on the night after the election on Wednesday evening. So be looking for us a little bit earlier next week out there on YouTube and a few other sites if we can find them. And that's about it for me. Any thing to add?
No, I'm excited for next week.
Good. Okay. Then we'll see each and everyone next week. Thank you, Rainer. Thank you, audience. And stick with us. It's a bumpy ride, but it'll be fun. So long till next week.